Greetings. So today we're going to look at Chapter 5 of the Approaching Democracy text, the presidency. A lot of the stuff in this particular chapter has been covered by the earlier four, so we can go at a somewhat faster pace than we used to in the particular initial four chapters because there was so much to be covered. So this one's going to be in two parts. This is going to be part one, and then part two will do the rest of the slide. Now I'll be doing the same thing that I do in chapter 4, where I'm going to be uploading the PowerPoint on YouTube. So, a couple of things we're going to take a look at. The first and foremost, of course, is the idea of a presidency, why the framers had a presidency, why the framers of the Constitution felt that a presidency was important. We're going to look at constitutional design and look at the idea how a presidency is somewhat vague in the kind of powers that it has, and we're going to look at the reasoning behind this idea of vagueness. We're going to look at what kind of roles the president does. We'll also look at how the president views his or her presidency. There are two ways a president can view their presidency, primarily as a constructionist or a steward, and we look at both kinds of views, and we'll also examine how presidents have been either primarily constructionist or steward-like in their policies. We will look at how a president can either how their power is either limited or how their power can expand, and we'll look at the idea of how presidents have been always trying to gain more power over the legislative body than they are initially given. We will look at what values and what means by which presidents can persuade Congress, and then we'll look at how the presidency has grown over time. So the presidency, or the idea of the presidency, is the idea of it being centered on one particular executive, which means that this one person now controls or is in a way a decision maker as an individual, rather than where on one side we have the judicial system and on the other side we have Congress, both the House and the Senate, and those are team-based ways of decision-making or decision-making based by groups. The presidency is decision-making based by an individual. So the president actually acts as a balance between essentially Congress, because there you have two houses, a house that is a part of a direct democracy, a house that initially wasn't, but now again also is a direct democratic method. Here you have one person who kind of sums up whatever Congress is going through and provides an alternative means of maybe looking at certain aspects and working with Congress to get things done. It is selection by an independent body of electors. Initially, the president was selected by something called an electoral college, and the electoral college were representatives that were created by the legislature, and these representatives then voted for the president. That is no longer the case. We'll talk about the Electoral College in later slides, but the ideology was to kind of remove the president from the masses, so we don't have a direct democracy in case the president. We have kind of a buffer in between, so that the president does not make any hasty decisions and is not swayed by the whims of the people or not affected by the whims of the people, because his or her election is by an independent body of electors. A fixed term of office allows the president an understanding to kind of focus on key issues that he or she feels must be institutionalized within his or her presidency, and the possibility of re-election allows them to go ahead and make sure that some of these key issues are addressed on a long-term basis, because frankly some policies you don't see the full effects in 4 years. You might not even see the full effects in 8 years. It sometimes takes 10 to 20 years to actually see the effects of a policy, but at least 8 years allows you to much more institutionalize or make it part of the institutions of government, make certain policies part of the institutions of government when you do that. Veto power is the ability of the president to go ahead and reject any kind of laws that he or she feels are not aligned with his or her presidency or his or her value systems or his or her ways of thinking about government. And so the president has the ability to veto any laws that Congress puts on his or her desk. The idea of independent executive action is kind of important as well. The president can make certain things happen without utilizing Congress, and that's called executive action or executive order. And we'll look at executive order in the corresponding slides. So here are the different presidents that we've had in certain key years. And as you can see, approval ratings mean nothing. You have some really low approval ratings for presidents that, in all honesty, were highly, highly effective presidents. And, political science historians have shown how incredible they were as presidents, but at the same time, when we look at the approval-disapproval ratings at that time, we see some really bad numbers. The same thing about good numbers. Just because the public approves of you does not necessarily mean you've been a highly effective president. So this, in essence, is a reason why we had a non-direct democracy and an ability for a president to be somewhat removed from the people, because the people don't necessarily always at that time exactly know what it means to be an effective president or what an effective presidency looks like. Who can be president? Well, someone who must be at least 35 years old, must have lived in the US for at least 14 years, and must be a natural-born citizen, which means must have been born in the US. The idea of this, of course, was in the beginning when America was a city, still is, but in those days had much more lax immigration policies, and as a result, it had a huge level of immigration, and the understanding was that if we have a president who was born an American, they might feel a lot more loyalty to the US as opposed to someone who might have come from a different country. Remember, the America of 200 or 300 years ago was nowhere near the America that we have right now. So, by constitutional design, this is why Congress created a president, or the framers created a president. First and foremost was a single presidency. A single presidency allows individual power and also allows leadership. So executive power would then retain its strength in an individual, not in a council or cabinet. That way, two things can happen. First of all, the leader can move much more faster if it's an individual on certain laws. And at the same time, if anything bad happens, you can ascribe a lot of negative reaction to a leader as well as positive reaction. The Electoral College was really important. Initially, neither the Congress nor the people would elect a president. A president would be chosen by an independent body of legislatures selected by the state, who would then produce a president. This independent body was called the Electoral College. In today's day and age, that no longer happens. Electoral College votes are provided to states based on population. So some states have much more Electoral College votes than other states. And as you vote for a president, say you're voting in California for a president, you're not really voting for the president itself. You're actually voting for Electoral College votes. And the president who gets elected is the one who has the most amount of Electoral College votes as opposed to the most amount of votes. Really important to know, primarily because George Bush in 2004 got elected based on not the total number of votes. If you look at the total number of votes that George Bush got, Al Gore actually beat him. But because he had more Electoral College votes, he became president. So that's kind of really important to understand. The president was given a fixed term of office, and the idea of this lies in both stability and constraint. If you have 4 years, you basically, as I said, focus on key issues, and you can't be removed from office in those 4 years, so you have the time to kind of get some policies enacted. But at the same time, certain policies take much longer than 4 years, so you can be re-elected, and that's the fourth thing. You can be eligible for more than one term of office, primarily so that if your policies are popular, or if you feel that your policies require a longer time, you at least have another 4 years to make sure that those policies become implemented and become institutionalized. Presidents can be removed by treason, and we'll talk about that in the coming slide. The president can be removed from office only by a cumbersome process of impeachment. Impeachment in here requires a two-thirds majority by both the House and the Congress. And only then can a president be removed. Very rarely are presidents impeached. I think the last president that got impeached was Richard Nixon. But it does force presidents sometimes to stay their hand. President Clinton was accused of lying in office over a certain personal scandal, and as a result could have really easily been impeached. The president is also given veto power, which means he or she can say no to Congress, and in this way the President plays a key role in the legislative process, because the Congress must consider the President's wishes. If Congress feels the President will not support this particular law, then Congress will probably try to revise the law just to make sure that it does get passed through Congress. Presidents also are not required to appoint an advisory council, though most presidents do. They are allowed to act on their own, but a lot of them do have an advisory council that helps them figure out matters of key policy concern.